A list of 11 geniuses who you might admire and consider noble. But boy, are they anything but noble. Sure, they gave so much to the world and pushed humanity forward, yet as people, they were horrible in ways you wouldn't believe. So, let's dive right in. Number 1 is Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf is one of the most celebrated writers in the English language. Her novels like Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse revolutionized modern literature through her pioneering use of stream of consciousness narrative. She wasn't just writing stories, she was exploring the human psyche in ways no one had done before. Her essay A Room of One's Own became a foundational text for feminist literature. Woolf's contribution to modernist literature is so significant that her face graces countless book covers and her works are studied in universities worldwide. Why evil? Well, Woolf's elitism sat so high above reality it barely knew the rest of us existed. She was a loyal supporter of what she called the leisure class, people with enough money that they didn't have to work. And she believed that reading and learning should be exclusive to the elites. Yes, you heard that right. The woman whose books are now required reading for millions of students believed that only rich people deserved education. She also looked down on the working class, describing them as loathsome, and showed disdain for the poor, calling them dull and smelly. In her private diaries, she wrote about her servants with a mixture of disgust and pity. She felt they deserved better lives, sure, but also believed they were fundamentally incapable of enjoying life on as deep a level as she did. The intellectual superiority complex was off the charts. And here's where it gets even more passive-aggressive. Woolf eventually stopped speaking to her servants entirely. Instead, she'd leave notes around the house with orders. When those orders weren't followed, she'd write in her diary about how this proved the inherent stupidity of the working class. Never mind that maybe her servants couldn't read her handwriting, or that leaving cryptic notes instead of having an actual conversation is a terrible management strategy. No, in Woolf's mind, it was evidence of their intellectual inferiority. The irony is almost too painful to bear. Today, her books are read by people from all walks of life, many of them from the exact working-class background she despised. One can only imagine her horror. Number 2 is Voltaire. François-Marie Arouet, better known as Voltaire, was the rock-star philosopher of the Enlightenment. His wit was legendary, his criticism of religious dogma was fearless, and his advocacy for freedom of speech and religious tolerance helped shape modern democratic thought. He wrote over 2,000 books and pamphlets, and more than 20,000 letters. His satirical novel, Candide, remains a masterpiece of literature. Voltaire essentially became the face of rational thinking and human progress. He's the guy famous for the quote, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," except he never actually said that, which is kind of fitting given what we're about to discuss. For a man who championed tolerance and reason, Voltaire was shockingly intolerant and unreasonable when it came to certain groups of people. He believed in a biological hierarchy of human beings, with black people near the bottom. In Les Lettres d'Amabed, he described Africans as animals with little intelligence. This wasn't just casual prejudice of the era. Voltaire's scientific racism provided intellectual ammunition for slavery and colonialism. And speaking of slavery, while he publicly criticized the slave trade at times, he personally invested in the French East India Company during the 1740s, when it was heavily involved in the triangular slave trade. He even directly funded slave transport voyages, including a ship called the St. George's in 1751. Is that all? No. After some bad financial dealings with Jewish financier, Voltaire went from praising Jewish culture to becoming viciously anti-Semitic. In his philosophical dictionary, he wrote passages so hateful that even his contemporaries were shocked. In one letter, he wrote about Jews, "They are, all of them, born with raging fanaticism in their hearts, just as the Bretons and the Germans are born with blonde hair." When called out by Isaac de Pinto in 1762, Voltaire admitted he was wrong and promised to revise the offensive passages in future editions, but he never did that. He even predicted that Jews could become deadly to the human race. Which, we can all tell now, definitely turned out to be. Number 3. Pablo Picasso. Pablo Picasso is arguably the most influential artist of the 20th century. Co-founder of Cubism, master of numerous artistic styles, and creator of groundbreaking works like Guernica, Picasso didn't just change art, he revolutionized how we think about visual representation. His output was staggering, over 50,000 artworks including paintings, drawings, sculptures, and ceramics. He could switch between styles as easily as changing clothes, and each phase of his work opened new possibilities for artistic expression. Museums around the world dedicate entire wings to his art. But the women in Picasso's life paid a horrifying price for his genius. His granddaughter Marina put it best in her memoir. She said, he submitted them to his animal sexuality, tamed them, bewitched them, ingested them, and crushed them onto his canvas. After he had spent many nights extracting their essence, once they were bled dry, he would dispose of them. That's not hyperbole. Two of the women in Picasso's life, Marie-Therese Walter and Jacqueline Roque, committed suicide. His grandson Pablito drank bleach and died after being turned away from Picasso's funeral by Jacqueline. His son Paolo died from depression-fueled alcoholism. Françoise Gillet, who lived with Picasso for 10 years, wrote that he told her, "For me there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats." When she dared to leave him and publish a memoir about their relationship, he cut off all contact with their two children, Claude and Paloma, in retaliation. Picasso's relationships followed a disturbing pattern. He'd pursue significantly younger women, establish complete psychological control over them, use them as muses, and then discard them when he lost interest. He was physically and emotionally abusive. His manipulation was so complete that several of his former partners never recovered. You can literally see the abuse cycle in his art. When a relationship began, he'd paint beautiful, tender portraits. As it deteriorated, the paintings became increasingly distorted and violent. His treatment of women wasn't just personal misconduct, it was integral to his artistic process. He viewed women as raw material to be consumed and transformed into art. Françoise Gillet described his total absence of empathy and love, his lack of remorse and facile rationalizations for hurting others, a lust for seduction as a form of exercising power over women, duplicity and manipulation as a way of life. These aren't the words of a bitter ex. These are the observations of someone who watched a man systematically destroy the women around him, while the art world applauded. Number 4 is Henry Ford. Henry Ford didn't invent the automobile, but he made it accessible to ordinary people. His introduction of the assembly line revolutionized manufacturing and ushered in the age of mass production. The Model T transformed American society, bringing mobility to the masses. Ford's innovations in production efficiency influenced manufacturing worldwide. He also paid his workers well above market rates, the famous $5 workday, which helped create a middle class that could afford to buy the products they were making. His business innovations fundamentally changed capitalism itself. But Ford's legacy is stained with something far darker than oil. He was a virulent anti-Semite whose views directly inspired Adolf Hitler. Hitler even kept Ford's portrait in his office and mentioned him admiringly in Mein Kampf. In 1938, Ford accepted the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, the highest honor Nazi Germany gave to a foreigner. Ford published a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, which ran a series of articles later compiled into a 4-volume book called The International Jew, The World's Foremost Problem, which pushed conspiratorial stereotypes about Jews controlling the world's finances, media, etc., none of which are true BTW. This wasn't some minor side project. Ford distributed 500,000 copies. The book became a bestseller in Germany and was translated into multiple languages. Nazi propagandists quoted Ford extensively, and his writings became required reading in German schools. The Nazis loved Ford so much they distributed his work free of charge in Germany. Henry Ford was a brilliant industrialist in many ways, but that doesn't erase the fact that he used his fame, wealth, and media ownership to promote hateful stereotypes and conspiracy theories about Jews.
Conspiracy, yeah.
Number 5 is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison is the archetypal American inventor, credited with 1,093 patents including the phonograph, the motion picture camera, and improvements to the light bulb and electric power distribution. His Menlo Park laboratory became the model for modern research and development facilities. Edison didn't just invent things, he created an entire system for innovation. His work literally illuminated the modern world, and his contributions to technology are still felt today. But during the War of Currents, his battle with Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse over electrical systems, Edison showed he was willing to go to some very dark places. Edison's direct current system was inferior to Tesla's alternating current system. Rather than accepting this, Edison launched a smear campaign that included publicly electrocuting animals to prove that AC current was dangerous. He started with smaller animals, but escalated to dogs, often acquired by paying neighborhood boys to bring him strays. The demonstrations were brutal and designed for maximum shock value. But Edison's most infamous act was the public electrocution of Topsy, an elephant at Coney Island who had killed 3 men. One of whom was trying to feed her a lit cigarette, so you tell me who the real monster was. In front of 1,500 spectators and rolling film cameras. Edison's team electrocuted Topsy with 6,600 volts of alternating current. The elephant was dead in seconds. Edison filmed it, of course, and the footage was distributed to demonstrate the dangers of AC current. This wasn't science, it was propaganda through animal cruelty. When proving that your rival's technology is dangerous involves torturing and killing innocent animals, you've lost any claim to moral authority. Edison was so obsessed with winning the currents war that he helped develop the electric chair, hoping public executions would turn people against AC power. But obviously, it didn't work. Tesla's AC system won because it was better, and Edison's legacy is now forever tainted by the trail of dead animals he left in his wake. Number 6 in our list is Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein fundamentally changed how we understand reality. His theory of special relativity revolutionized physics, his work on the photoelectric effect helped establish quantum mechanics, earning him the Nobel Prize, and his general theory of relativity reimagined gravity itself. E=mc² is probably the most famous equation ever written. Einstein's contributions laid the groundwork for everything from nuclear energy to GPS satellites. He wasn't just a genius, he was the unit of measurement for genius. Why evil? Well, bro was a racist. While traveling in Asia and the Middle East from October 1922 to March 1923, Einstein kept a diary later published as the Travel Diaries of Albert Einstein, the Far East, Palestine, and Spain, 1922 to 1923. In that diary he wrote about people in China, for example, describing them as industrial, filthy, obtuse, and a peculiar herd-like nation, often more like automatons than people. He also wrote, "It would be a pity if these Chinese supplant all other races. For the likes of us, the mere thought is unspeakably dreary." The editor of the diary, Z.E.V. Rosencrantz, describes these passages as a clear hallmark of racism. Although later in life, after emigrating to the U.S., Einstein publicly spoke out against racism and segregation. For instance, in 1946 at Lincoln University he said that separation of black and white people in the U.S. is a disease of white people. He also supported civil rights organizations, worked with black scholars and activists, and was vocal on the subject of equality. But wait. Bro was also a serial adulterer who wrote candidly to friends about his affairs. In one letter, he philosophized that men aren't naturally monogamous, and wives should tolerate their husband's infidelity with a smile. Number 7 is Aristotle. Aristotle was one of the foundational philosophers of Western civilization. Student of Plato, tutor of Alexander the Great, and a polymath who made contributions to logic, metaphysics, ethics, biology, mathematics, botany, physics, politics, agriculture, medicine, dance, and theater. His works shaped Christian, Islamic, and Jewish philosophy. The scope of his intellectual influence is almost incomprehensible. For over 1,000 years, saying Aristotle said so was essentially the end of any argument. His logical system remained the dominant form of logic until the 19th century. But Aristotle's views on women were horrible. He claimed women were essentially incomplete men, literally, biologically inferior. In his view, women should be subservient to men in all things, to the point where they shouldn't even be allowed to eat as much food as men. He wrote that women were fundamentally less rational, less capable of self-control, and existed primarily for reproduction and household management. His writings on women influenced medieval and Renaissance thought for centuries, providing philosophical justification for the oppression of half the human race. The father of Western philosophy was also one of history's most influential misogynists, and his ideas held back women's rights for millennia. When your philosophical legacy includes giving intellectual ammunition to centuries of gender oppression, that's a pretty significant stain on your record, even if you did come up with ethics. Number 8 is Isaac Newton. So Isaac Newton basically invented modern physics. His laws of motion, theory of universal gravitation, work in optics, and his development of calculus fundamentally shaped our understanding of the natural world. Principia Mathematica is one of the most important scientific works ever published. Newton's work was so groundbreaking that it remained the foundation of physics for over 200 years, until Einstein came along. He wasn't just brilliant, he redefined what scientific brilliance meant. But Newton was also one of the pettiest, most vindictive scientists in history. His decades-long feud with Robert Hooke is legendary for all the wrong reasons. Hooke theorized gravity before Newton did, but he just couldn't work out the math. When Newton published Principia and his gravitational law, Hooke quite reasonably pointed out that he deserved some credit for the initial concept. Newton's response was to spend the rest of his life systematically destroying Hooke's reputation. Because Newton was more famous and influential, he used his position to suppress Hooke's work. He removed all references to Hooke from later editions of his works. He slandered Hooke in open letters, calling him an idiot. The pettiness continued even after Hooke's death. Newton became president of the Royal Society in 1703, the year Hooke died. One of his first acts was to accidentally lose the only known portrait of Hooke. Some historians believe Newton deliberately destroyed it. Today, we have no idea what Robert Hooke looked like, while Newton's face is instantly recognizable worldwide. That's not just winning a scientific argument, that's trying to erase someone from history because you couldn't share credit. Number 9 is John Lennon. John Lennon was one quarter of the Beatles, arguably the most influential band in music history. His songwriting partnership with Paul McCartney produced some of the most iconic songs ever written. As a solo artist, Imagine became an anthem for peace and unity. Lennon was the face of the counterculture movement of the 1960s, an advocate for peace, love, and ending war. His cultural impact extended far beyond music. He became a symbol of hope and social change for an entire generation. But the man who sang All You Need Is Love had a very different approach to love in his personal life. He beat women. This isn't speculation or rumor. Lennon openly admitted it in a 1980 Playboy interview. He said, "I was a hitter. I couldn't express myself and I hit. I fought men and I hit women." He was talking about his first wife Cynthia, and other women before his relationship with Yoko Ono. The hypocrisy is staggering. Here's a man who positioned himself as a moral authority, who sang about giving peace a chance, and who preached love and harmony, while privately terrorizing the women in his life. His son Julian, from his first marriage, has spoken about how absent and cruel Lennon was as a father, while Julian's half-brother Sean received all the love and attention. Lennon was, by multiple accounts, emotionally abusive and neglectful to his first family, while crafting his image as a peaceful spiritual guru. Number 10. Number 10 is Harry F. Harlow. Harry Harlow revolutionized developmental psychology with his maternal separation experiments on rhesus monkeys in the 1950s and 60s. His research conclusively demonstrated that infant primates need more than just food, they need contact, comfort, warmth, and social connection. His experiments with wire and cloth surrogate mothers showed that baby monkeys chose comfort over food, fundamentally challenging the prevailing behaviorist view that attachment was purely about reinforcement through feeding. This research shaped our understanding of child development, influenced attachment theory, and changed how we think about parenting and child welfare. His work is still cited and taught in psychology courses worldwide. But here's where things get dark, really dark. Harlow's later experiments went far beyond studying attachment. They became exercises in deliberately inflicting psychological torture on helpless animals. He created what he literally called the pit of despair, an isolation chamber where young monkeys who had already bonded with their mothers were kept alone for weeks. Within days, they stopped moving and huddled in corners. As Harlow himself wrote, one might presume at this point that they find their situation to be hopeless. He also isolated infant monkeys for up to a year in what he called total isolation, steel boxes where they could see nothing and no one. These monkeys emerged profoundly damaged, rocking back and forth, biting themselves, and pulling out their own hair. They couldn't interact with other monkeys. Some refused to eat and starved themselves to death. Harlow even designed what he dubbed a rape rack to forcibly breed female monkeys who had been so psychologically destroyed by isolation that they couldn't engage in normal mating behavior. The female monkeys who were forcibly impregnated proved incapable of mothering. They ignored, abused, or killed their babies. Harlow wrote, "Not even in our most devious dreams could we have designed a surrogate as evil as these real monkey mothers were," seemingly oblivious to the fact that he had created these monsters through torture. Here's the thing that makes this even worse. Critics at the time pointed out that these experiments weren't revealing anything we didn't already know. In 1974, literary critic Wayne Booth wrote that Harlow kept proving what we all knew in advance, that social creatures can be destroyed by destroying their social ties. Even Harlow's own student who placed monkeys in a pit of despair wrote that he could find no monkey who had any defense against it. Even the happiest monkeys came out damaged. So what was the scientific value? Harlow's later work descended into what many scientists now recognize as sadism disguised as research. He was deliberately inducing depression and psychosis in monkeys not to learn something new, but because he could. After his wife died of cancer, colleagues noted his experiments became even more cruel. Some speculate he was working through his own depression by inflicting it on helpless animals. Today, these experiments are cited as a key factor in the rise of the animal liberation movement. They would never be approved by a modern ethics board. Harlow's early work had value, but he didn't stop when he'd made his point. He continued torturing monkeys for decades. And that's not science, but utter cruelty. Number 11 in our list is Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was a visionary inventor whose work in alternating current electrical systems literally powers the modern world. He held over 300 patents and made groundbreaking contributions to wireless communication, radio, X-ray technology, and electrical engineering. His AC motor and transformer designs made long-distance electrical transmission possible, enabling the electrification of the world. Tesla imagined wireless communication and power transmission long before the technology existed. He was so far ahead of his time that many of his ideas are only now being fully appreciated and developed. The man was quite literally the mad scientist of electricity. But Tesla had a dark side that's often glossed over in the worship of this internet-beloved scientist. He was a passionate supporter of eugenics. For those unfamiliar, eugenics is the practice of improving the human race through selective breeding, essentially treating humans like livestock and preventing undesirables from reproducing. It's the pseudoscientific foundation that the Nazis used to justify their atrocities. Tesla wasn't shy about his views. In his writings, he predicted that by 2011, eugenics will be universally established, and praised it as essential for weeding out undesirable strains. He believed that people with disabilities, mental illness, or below-average intelligence should be prevented from having children. He wrote about this, not as some unfortunate speculation, but as a positive vision of humanity's future. What makes this particularly disturbing is that Tesla himself never married or had children. He is one of the smartest people to ever live, and he thought it was such a bad idea for him to reproduce that he remained celibate his entire life. His standards for who deserved to pass on their genes were so impossibly high that even he didn't make the cut. So, there you have it. But wait, I have a request. Please help me reach 1,000 subscribers so I can monetize and make more of these stupid content. And perhaps the most important takeaway from this video is, when we idolize historical figures, we need to tell the whole story, not to tear down their achievements, but to remind ourselves that genius doesn't equal goodness, and that we should be very careful about who we choose as heroes. History is complicated, people are complicated, and maybe that's exactly how we should remember them. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Please subscribe, guys. It's free and it only takes a second for you, but it means the world to me.